Well, friends, we made it to church. Hooray! That's right, we've overcome whatever obstacles were standing in our way to being here this morning. That is, more sleep, or the snow in our driveway, or the Sunday morning talking heads. And now we have gained at least enough inertia to get it through these doors and find our pew. That is, of course, unless we're watching on the live stream or listening on the radio, in which case, partial credit. The point is, we're here. Some for the first time, some for the last, and some against their will. If that's one of you, just give me a sign. We have made it to church, and we are here, at least physically. As we know, there's a difference between being here and being here. And while we're listening to the preacher drone on, hoping he will get to his point at some point here, while we're doing our best to pay attention, while we're sitting in our favorite pew, assuming we got here on time, it's a stretch to say that we are fully here. There's a difference between being here and being here. As we know, while we're sitting here, our minds are wandering. We're compiling our grocery lists. We're thinking about that strange conversation. We're hoping for a snow day. Some of us are stuck in the last week, some of us are stuck in the week ahead, and some of us are just plain stuck. And who could blame us? After all, we are people who are going so fast through life. We're moving at such lightning speed. We have so much on our plates, so much that we're trying to do. Is it any wonder that when we finally have a moment to take a break from the chaos, when we finally find that eye of the storm, that when we finally sit down, is it any wonder that our minds start to wander? Either to our own trials and tribulations, or to those trials and tribulations around the world. And friends, there's plenty to choose from. Is it any wonder that as we sit in church, as we bring our gifts before that proverbial altar, we find our minds starting to wander? The good news, friends, is that whether we're here or there, we're not alone. Whether we're here or there, this is a safe place to be, and so wander on. After all, if we can't do that in church, where can we? There are worse places where we can sit and let our minds wander. At least we're not alone. It's a reminder that we can bring whatever we have on our hearts and minds to this place. That's part of what it means to be a member of a church. To be a part of this community is to bring all that you have, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The challenge is to be not so stuck there that while we're here, we miss what here is telling us about there. And so today, on this day when we have new friends joining our fellowship, on this fifth Sunday after Epiphany, whether we find ourselves more here than there or more there than here, we pause for just a moment to be reminded of what here has to say about there. Because, friends, if here doesn't affect there, then we've missed the point entirely. Our sermon today continues with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from Matthew's Gospel. It's his best sermon. It's someplace where he can see everybody. We've known the beginning. It opened so well. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, blah, blah, blah. Then he got to a great middle part, which reminded us of who we are. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And now he's coming finally to the middle of the sermon, which, as we know, is the part of the sermon when our minds start to wander. Welcome back. It's the part of the sermon when we start to shift from the exposition to the meat, when we start to wonder, what is this all about? When we start to ask ourselves, what's the practical application? What am I supposed to do with all that I've heard? And Jesus doesn't disappoint. Just be careful what you wish for. He says, you have heard it said that you shall not murder, that those who murder shall be liable to punishment. And we think, check. We can do that one. We've got that one pretty well accomplished, but Jesus doesn't stop there. He continues, but I say to you, if you are angry with your brother or sister, you shall be liable to judgment. If you're angry with your brother or sister, you shall be liable to judgment. Now, that one's a little harder. I mean, has he met my sisters? And it's even harder when we realize that he's not just talking about our biological brothers or sisters. Jesus is speaking, as he so often does, about all of those other children of God. Young, old, black, white, gay, straight, male, female, rich, poor, broken, whole. If that doesn't sound hard enough, add Republican, Democrat. If you are angry with your brother or sister, you shall be liable to judgment. And then he ups the ante. He says, if you insult a brother or sister, you shall be liable to counsel. If you say, you fool, to a brother or sister, you shall be liable to the hell of fire. Now, to be clear, that word for hell is actually in the Greek Gehenna, which is a city just outside of Jerusalem. And so what he's saying is, it was a city known for their pagan ritual of fire. So what he's saying is, if you are a person who spends your life demeaning others, if you're a person who feels like they need to tear down all of those around you to build yourself up, you will quickly find yourself outside of the community. And as we know from hard experience, it is a hard place to be, a place where we're liable to get burned. So to recap, those who murder will be liable to punishment. Those who are angry will be liable to judgment. Those who insult will be liable to loss of the community itself. This, friends, is much harder. Who among us in the last few months has not said, you fool? Who among us has not been angry with our brother or sister? Who among us hasn't been on one side or the other and pushed the other person away? This is a hard task set before us. But we see what Jesus is trying to do. It's the same thing he does in every sermon he preaches, in every sermon we preach, right? He's saying that our relationships to one another matter. That what happens here has to affect what happens there. That it matters the way we connect with one another, person to person, soul to soul, heart to heart. That this matters, that our relationships in this world have to look a little different. That we are called to love one another. To be clear, it doesn't mean that we can't be angry. Anger is a way that we show that we care about something, but perhaps what he's suggesting is make sure it's something worth being angry about. Someone taking our favorite pew, or cutting us off on the highway, or not replacing the toilet paper roll, these things in the end are just not that big a deal. But it doesn't take more than a cursory glance around our world to find things worth being angry about. The question is, what are we going to do with that anger? Augustine said, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger to recognize the injustices of this world, and the courage to do something about it. But Jesus doesn't just stop with what we shouldn't do. He moves on to what we should. That is, he moves on to the positive, not just the negative. He says, so, if when you bring your gift before the altar, you remember that a brother or sister has something against you, go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Friends, the only gift we have to give is our life. That's it. What else do we have? And the truth is, we can't give it if it's stuck somewhere else. If it's stuck in that broken relationship, if it's stuck in that place between you and me, we don't have anything to give. And so we have to first reconcile ourselves to one another. It's only then that we have a gift to offer. It's only then that it's freely given. First, reconcile yourselves to one another, and then bring your gift. That's what we do when we come to church. We come and we try and drop off that which we can, and then we go back in the world to try and live a little differently, and then we come back to remind ourselves of how we're called to live, and then we go back out into the world to try it again. We come, we leave our gift, we go, we try and be reconciled to the world, and then we come back. But the truth is, it's hard. What is it in your life that needs reconciliation? To whom do you need to be reconciled? Surely someone. Think of the last few months. How divided we have felt as individuals, as a country, as a world. That space between you and me, between here and there, just keeps growing. That chasm just seems so insurmountable. It can feel hopeless, like we're trapped. As Jesus reminds us in the rest of the passage, that we get stuck. And if we're not willing to reach out a hand across the aisle, if we're not reaching out across that chasm, we will soon find ourselves imprisoned by our own stubbornness. We've gotten so used to looking to see if someone has an R or a D after their name and assuming we know everything we need to know about them. Remember, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. We've gotten the anger part down, but now perhaps we need a little courage to do something about it. And so, friends, here's the challenge. This week ahead, find someone who thinks differently than you and talk with them. Don't just turn on MSNBC or Fox News. Just sit down with another human being, person to person, face to face, and listen. Hear what they have to say. Begin by recognizing that that person, just like you are, is another child of God. Yes, they might think differently than you. You might hate everything they have to say. But if you can recognize their personhood, perhaps we have a place to begin. Will it change the entire world? Probably not, but at least it's a starting place. And friends, we have to start somewhere. If we can bridge the gap between here and there for somebody else in one of our relationships, there just might be hope for this broken world. Because the longer it takes for us to get from here to there, the more people in this world will suffer. I was reminded this week of what's at stake in our division. I had a chance to meet on Thursday morning with two missionaries. They're Americans, but their field of mission is Estonia, Eastern Europe. They're not the kind of missionaries that goes out and try and convert people to the Christian faith. Instead, they're a people who go and put their arms and feet and hands out there to love their neighbor as themselves. They're a people who are trying to live out by responding to actual human need, and in so doing, share the gospel. They were my age, with 3 children my children's age. They had been in Russia, working at an orphanage there, until a couple of years ago when that was no longer an option for them. They found their way to Estonia and at first had no idea what they were going to do, that is, until the refugee crisis began. And millions of people, men, women, children, people with names, with hopes, with dreams, left their home to find life. Millions. The stories that they told have kept me awake for the last few nights. They told of people freezing to death in abandoned warehouses, of children, actual children starving or being sold into the sex trade. And the good news is there are warm-hearted people who are doing their best to help. They are giving everything they possibly have in order to make a difference in these people's lives. The bad news is it's not nearly enough. And the worst news is that the church is almost completely absent. You see, we've made it about politics, like refugees have something to do with whether we're a Republican or a Democrat, but the truth is we are human beings. And we have a responsibility as Christians to one another. And when they began to share with all of those supporting congregations that they were switching their mission from the Russian orphans to these refugees, largely Muslims from Afghanistan and Syria and other war-torn countries, their churches withdrew their support. And in not so many words shouted, "You fools!" This couple does not know what to do. They said, "This is not about politics. If you could just come and see what it is I'm looking at, you would know." There will come a moment when I will have to look into my grandchild's eyes and answer the question, where were you? To be clear, I know how I plan to answer. And I pray that you will join me in figuring out how we as a congregation might respond. We've all made it to church today. But if what we do here does not affect there, then we've missed the point entirely. First, go and be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Amen.